However, if you go to one of the large Amazon facilities, which Paul Granillo, the president of IEP, recently did, and he walked over and saw this guy that had a computer who was sitting with the computer basically on a tray in his lap, running hundreds of robots. He was in charge of all of that. And he asked him, where'd you go to school? He said, Bloomington High. That's upward mobility. He started on the line. He started at a minimum pay job going into the sector and went up as a consequence of it. Now, manufacturing. This is a rebar company that's in Rancho Cucamonga, Fontana. We have two big industrial operations dealing with steel. Cal Steel buys bulk steel overseas, imports it, and makes their products. They employ, round figures, 1,000 people, making around 60 to 75,000 a year. If the tariffs go through and cover that block steel they import, they may not be in business afterwards. That's the risk that's being taken here. I've been in Washington with the COO of that company repeatedly to say, it's in the fine print how you do it. It's very, very important for our economy. One of our big issues here is this. We have been growing manufacturing jobs in the state. We're up 4% since 2011 in California. The country's up, round figures, 8%. So twice that fast. Why is it that our manufacturing is not keeping up with manufacturing growth in the country? The answer can be seen on this chart. These are the cents per kilowatt hour charged by every state west of the Mississippi but California. The highest is North Dakota. The lowest is state of Washington. Now let's put California on the map. Now you're a manufacturer who needs industrial electricity. Are you coming to California? That's with 30% renewables. Now we've passed saying, let's make it 50. That chart is going to keep going out. It's not competitive to have one state do it when the others are not, because it creates those kinds of differentials, and it's one of the reasons why California manufacturing is having trouble growing. Now, this is how much more expensive California is than North Dakota, number 2. We're only 71% more expensive for electricity. What about for Arizona? 123%, more than double. What about Nevada? 147.6% more expensive. These are disasters for our companies. Now then there's this. If all the rest of that worried you, this one should take care of it for you. Some of you, as far as I can tell, were probably around in the 70s. A few of you may remember that fact, some of you may not. This is what the forecasts are of the benefit of marijuana in California. Excuse me, we're supposed to say cannabis now. We're being bigger word. I think it's actually smaller. The tan part of this is medical marijuana. So basically, not a lot of growth. But marijuana for fun, for adults, going up. Then there's this guy. With all due respect, you ought to get in a plane and go back to Washington where he came from. By the way, if you want to talk about industrial rents, go look at what they're getting per square foot down in Desert Hot Springs, up in Adelanto, over in Coachella. It's like double or triple normal rents as a consequence, and this industry is expected to explode. 5.2% of our job growth in manufacturing, medium pay, solid, $51,385 for all manufacturers. Now, moving into the real estate sector, about which you know more than I do. These are what the data show us seasonally adjusted. It peaked at 29,847 seasonally adjusted units. When was that? That's back in 2005, I believe. It then crashes to 11,255. Then it has a short peak at 20,517. That's mostly foreclosures. Then we see it sort of level out, and the most recent number is 16,493. What you're not seeing is, this is all home sales, is a lot of growth. It's pretty well been horizontal. It was picking up a little bit, but it sort of fell off the last couple of quarters. Now the price trends. New home prices, 439, 612. That is 0.6% record, higher than what it was back in the boom. So the new home market is now very slightly more expensive than at the peak back in the 2006 period of time. Existing homes have not done so well. They're at 334, 6. They're still 14% below the peak. So they've been headed up, but they're not there yet. Now, do we need them to get there? Not necessarily. A lot of the people who were in that top of a thumb there where the red goes up and down, those people bought at the absolute peak when prices were insane and financing was crazy. So a lot of those people have lost their homes. Now, one of the factors affecting a lot of this is the conforming loan ceilings that you have on prices. For the Inland Empire, according to HUD, 424.1 is as far as you can go. For LA and Orange County, which means if you go from Chino Hills to Pomona or to any of the other cities over there, it's 636.150. So it's based upon the incomes of this area, which really doesn't make a lot of sense that a lot of the buyers come out of the coastal counties heading this way. It does interfere with our particular market. Now, this is the median price of homes in the fourth quarter. Inland Empire, San Diego, LA, and Orange. What are we seeing? Inland Empire, $350. San Diego, $592. LA, $597. And it's only $777,000 in Orange County. Of course, all of us can immediately run out and buy 2 or 3 of those. What do you save coming to the Inland Empire? $242,000 to $247,000 if you're coming out from LA or out from San Diego, or $427,000 if you're coming from Orange County. This is what's always driven our market, is that graph. The only difference now, which other times, those are the biggest differentials we've ever seen. And I think you're starting to see some of that action now get into the market. It's taken a while to get there. So it's highest gaps in history. Vacant new homes, you will know better than I are. There aren't any. It used to be you built it and said they would come. Now they come, you cut a deal, then you build it. So they've really reversed the psychology. Notice as a default, for all intents and purposes, there aren't any. They're now lower than they were sometime before 2000. I have a suspicion that goes all the way back to sometime in the 80s. So we've actually eliminated that particular piece of the issue. These are the apartment rates for Class A apartments in the Inland Empire. Vacancy rate a little higher than it is elsewhere. $1,239 is not cheap, but is certainly cheaper than the alternatives. Again, that's what happens in our area. It's the best paying blue collar sector at $52,604. That then brings us to the piece of the puzzle that hasn't been growing very much. What we need in this area outside of healthcare to get that part of the economy going are entrepreneurs, whether it's an ESRI in Redlands or Bourne's Electronics in Riverside, Sorensen Engineering in Yucaipa, Sigmanet in Ontario. These are companies that are very high-end, that were essentially started here, have grown here, pay really well. We just don't have enough of them. And the problem here is BA or higher. For us, it's 21%. In Southern California, the coastal counties, it's 37. If you look over at the expanded Bay Area, with BA or higher, it's 42.8%. We have trouble competing in that universe. The good news on this chart, however, is if we look at 2015 versus 2016, there was not quite a 1% jump in the share of the population with BA or above. So the trend is moving finally in the right direction, but it's got a long way to go. The office market is relatively boring. Net absorption, 389,000 square feet. Vacancy rate has dropped from 24.2 down to 10.7%, but it's a market with trouble. And part of the trouble is e-commerce. An awful lot, we've been told over and over again, that goes on online, that used to go on in offices, so you don't need as much office space for the same size economy. Lease rates are down from the peak by 4.8%, though they are up 16.6 from the low. The other piece of the puzzle on the airports, which does affect the office market, is Ontario was up 6.8. Now, I understand in January it's up double digits. I haven't seen those numbers yet. But the fact is, LAWA practically destroyed Ontario Airport. And the way you can see it is they said, oh, it's the economy. Well, go over and see, where's that blue line intersect? Between 1987 and 1988. They took our volume back to the 87-88 period. Despite the fact our population more than doubled, the number of companies doubled, and the number of jobs more than doubled, and they said, oh, it was the economy causing the slowdown. Nonsense. Unfortunately, we got to get that back, but we now have control so we can. What's going on in these high-end sectors? They're only 2.7% of our job growth. So not very much. And that is our biggest problem as a region. Median pay in those sectors is $73,000. It's great. We just don't have enough of them, partially because we don't have the labor force for it. The other pretty good paying sector is local government and state government. However, the number of jobs down 1.7%. Median pay in the sector, $61,185, pretty good, but not growing much at all. In the retail sector, which is the last piece of the puzzle, that's the secondary tier that we look at. You can see that the retail rate, $210 a square foot, triple net, 8.2% vacancy. The market is the weakest of the major counties around us. All of these sectors are low paying. You see in there agriculture, social assistance, retail, hotel, part-time work, all of those. They are 40% of our economy. Very modest paying, as I said, $30,652 or below. So ending up and looking ahead, one, Trump's impact hits this year, not last year. Two, healthcare strong, but still facing ACA assaults. Three, logistics strong, record imports and e-commerce driving it. Manufacturing strong, the U.S. environment not good in California for us. Construction is moving towards being our strongest sector again. Retail possibly hurt by new tax rules. It's certainly e-commerce. I'm sorry, the residential market. Industrial construction, really strong with logistics. Office market, weak because of e-commerce and vacancies. Brick and mortar retailers, and therefore cities and counties, under threat from e-commerce. We do have a smaller share of low-paying jobs. Now, last year at this time, I make a forecast. Last year I forecast 46,600 jobs, 3.3% job growth, and a 5.6% unemployment rate. Where did we end up? 43,042 is the preliminary number. We'll get the actual numbers tomorrow, I believe. 3% job growth, not 3.3, but the unemployment rate lower. So right now, the fact that these forecasts are generally done with a blindfold, a tall conical-shaped hat, and a Target, I'll take them. Thanks an awful lot.
Without wasting any time, I wanted to start with Todd. Todd and Steven got the Real Estate Investment Club. Hey, guys, if you're going to move out of the room, you got to be quiet. Hey, hello. I need you guys to keep it quiet. Please, please, please. Thank you. Much better. All right. So I wanted to start with Todd, and I specifically wanted to talk about the type of person who is showing up at your guys' investment club, because I've been to a couple of them. And did I steal something from you, John?
No. Would you tell them that this is going online on my website?
You know what? A few of you have been texting me, and we're just so jam-cracked. I'm pretty sure that everybody's slides that you saw today, you'll have access to. John will. I know Chris posts his on his own website. Give us a couple of days. We'll get it posted on our website. Normally, Bruce doesn't have any problem with that anyway. So yeah, I know I see people taking pictures, and I hate it when I have to do that. Anyway, we'll make all of the stuff available to you, and if we can't, we can. We'll make it happen. Okay. So who's coming to the investment club?
All right. So about 50% of the people that come to the club are new people that are looking to get into the real estate investment world somewhere. They've probably gone to one of those expensive, like $40,000 seminars or something, and they want to get in, or they've watched the TV shows Flip or Flop or something like that on TV, and think that's fun. I can do that, like they remodeled their home, or maybe they bought a home and the price went up, and they're now a real estate flipper in their mind. So, so about 50% of the people that come are that sort of a person. They want to get in. The other half are people that already work in the industry, people that are already investors, or people that are real estate agents. We have title people come from time to time. Who we really need more of are more people working in the industry that can actually help out real estate investors in some form or fashion. So, people like appraisers, we need contractors, home inspection companies, termite companies. These people don't show up, and there's a room full of people ready to give them work. So that's who comes. It's mostly,
Right.
investors and people.
I'm just looking for a clicker. Hey, Drake, just advance me one slide. Okay, so I only got one slide to go. Okay, so 50% are kind of, let's check this out, I'm kind of interested.
Yeah.
Another percentage are actually doing it. I've attended their club 3 times, I think, and I'm just shocked, because that seemed to be what I saw. Just kind of people, hey, I'm checking it out my first time, what's going on? But people are doing deals, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is anybody out there has a cousin or something like that has a piece of junk house and needs to get rid of it, and if you figure out a way to work with them and negotiate a good price with them, anybody can become a real estate investor. There's no licensing currently necessary to do it. Anybody can jump in.
Right. Okay, and by the way, this panel is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to kind of do these individually here, because our topics are just, they are what they are. This was kind of like, let's just throw on our leftovers. Sorry, guys. Okay, but back to Todd. Okay, so who's buying, number one, and are any of these people, are they sellers right now? Do you have any sellers that are coming in there trying to pitch their stuff?
So the people that are
Probably
sellers,
they don't want to go to you to pitch it because you want a discount.
Yeah, nobody that actually owns a home as a homeowner and then is coming to sell it comes to the club. But it wouldn't be a horrible place, because they'd have a room full of people and you could probably get a bidding war going. But the people that come to sell are wholesalers, people that get a property under contract. Maybe they're working with an agent, maybe they're not, but they come and they pitch their deal they might have.
Probably the wrong question for you, Todd, because my thought as I was typing that question, who's buying and selling, is, and so far nobody's addressed it today, and I don't know if Chris has a comment or a slide on it. I guess we'll find out here in a few minutes. But a lot of these hedge funds are in the market. Some of them have already sold. Some of them are talking about selling. I've got a couple that I've been talking to now that we sold properties to back in the day, and now they're getting ready to exit. So those folks don't necessarily want to sell to you. They want to sell retail.
Yeah, but they can get a much better price putting it out on the open market rather than selling to an investor, because we're not going to pay the price they want to get, and right now they're getting market prices or above. So why sell to us?
Got it. Okay, I want to switch to tax reform. We've had a little bit of talk about it. I think, at least as far as I know, we don't have a lot of CPAs in the room. Most of us are not in that wheelhouse. Brooke is. I was introduced to Brooke a few years ago. Not from my tax guy, but I kind of had a bad breakup. But anyway, like I said earlier today, I was in Brooke's office. He was doing my stuff, And I'm like, hey, what's the man on the street? Which I guess you kind of got to quantify without breaking any confidence of your clients. What kind of range maybe are they income-wise? But he basically said great things. So what's going on with this tax reform that you've seen so far this year?
Sure. As far as like quantifying and going into the demographics of my client base, I would say the whole spectrum is covered. Realtors, doctors, developers, loan officers, etc. I have tables of them in front of me, smirking at me. So I see the whole spectrum. Every aspect of the economy, you could say, is covered by my office. We handle maybe 1,500 to 1,800 returns this year. Personally, I've done close to 650 so far this year. And every return, there's little analysis that says, how will the tax reform affect you next year? And of every single return I've looked at, 2, it was negative. So the rest, it's all fine. And those 2 were people that had really heavy, we all know what 2106 expenses are. Loan officers hate them. Those people who had really heavy 2106 expenses were negatively impacted because those are gone. You no longer can write off your unreimbursed work expenses. So
Unreimbursed what?
work expenses.
Oh, yeah, those.
Yeah, those 2106 wonderful expenses that make it so you can't get a loan. So that'll be great for realtors. You no longer have to arm wrestle your clients into reporting their taxes right. So
Okay, but the percentage is kind of crazy. You've done over 600 returns and 2?
so far there's been 2 that didn't have a positive impact from the tax reform.
Now, if you were doing returns in Newport Beach, what would that be? Probably, just obviously you're guessing, or maybe you're not. What do you think that number would be?
That's a great question. So the main impact of, like, logistically, where do you live, is you're limited to $10,000 on. We're going to get really nerdy here for a second, but $10,000 for your state and local taxes is all you can write off going forward. So if your property taxes are $25,000 down in Newport Beach, you're taking a hit. Here in the Inland Empire, you're probably not paying $20,000 in property taxes, but with your state income taxes withheld, coupled with those other things, you might hit that threshold. You'll lose a little bit of that deduction, but that's made up with a greater standard deduction, lower tax brackets, and that's what's offsetting everything in general and making it so that most people are seeing a positive impact.
I have a question. Being a realtor in the room, and a lot of others out there, CAR fought this, NAR fought this, because they perceived a negative impact on the desirability of purchasing a new home or purchasing a home. Have you seen people saying, I think I'm not going to buy because I don't get the mortgage interest deduction effectively?
That's a great question. I've had this conversation with Ed Hoffman, Jared Jones, a couple other realtors in the room, where we've talked about the psychological impact. Why do people buy? And initially they think, well, I'm going to save on my taxes, but most people want to buy for other reasons. They want to buy because that's the American dream, to own a home.
Yeah, and I don't know who agrees with that in the room, but
I agree with that in the room.
Yeah, and I do as well. Well, okay. Shall we applaud? Well, all right. Well, but that's almost kind of been a taboo topic if you were in organized real estate, because we for so long have just been defending mortgage interest deduction at any cost. And Ed touched on it earlier, and I think a lot of us would agree that, okay, it's kind of nice, but at the end of the day, if we're going to have any meaningful tax return or tax reform, everybody's going to have to take a look at it. And I don't know what the future of it is, but I would agree that people are probably not buying a house because they want to save a few grand on their taxes. Again, long topic. We could go on forever, but let's give Doug another opportunity on the ballot initiative. But I'm doing this at my own risk. Does anybody have any real basic questions on it? I mean, I'll maybe raise a hand or two and maybe regret it. Okay, so since I don't see that, then I'm going to hope that Prop 60 and Prop 90, you guys have a general understanding of what we're trying to do. So let's get into some more of the deeper stuff with this. We have a deadline for this, and if it wasn't clear, what we are attempting to do as a real estate organization is we are attempting to, and again, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, is to qualify a ballot initiative, okay? And in order to qualify it to get on the ballot for voters to approve, we need how many signatures?
We need 1 million.
We need 1 million, okay? And by the way, right now this is being funded by everybody who's paying CAR dues your effort, your money is going into funding this. Okay, so we need a million signatures. Do we have any idea how many we have?
No, but we're close. The thing about CAR, two things about CAR. CAR is your California Association of Realtors, and they work for you. How many members in the room? How many? Can I ask? Great. God bless you. You've helped funding this. But more importantly, every day you support an organization that does two things. Not just protect your business, but protects the individual property rights of all Californians. And I'm very proud to be part of that. One of the reasons why I agreed to be a part of this is because this initiative helps both organizations, both entities, homeowners and you salespeople, because we're going to generate more transactions. But it also helps people, one, stay in the state, frees up properties so they can go reach their dreams. I alluded earlier that I sold a house. I didn't move out of state because my grandchildren are here, and I'm not going anywhere. But this would help more people make that decision to stay. It is a good idea proposition. The reality is that the state legislature is going to fight it, and many other entities, because it reduces the amount of property taxes, which funds many programs, such as police and fire. Oh, well, those are good programs. However, we believe that the loss in that will be made up by this generation in sale that's generated from sales in the area, in all areas. And we highly suggest that you at least go back and take a look at our proposition, sign it, and let's get it turned in, and let's let the people decide, because that's the best way to know if it's a good idea.
And there is a deadline for this. I mean,
It's
obviously
today.
Oh, the deadline's today.
Well, they want the forms back there today, but
Collating.
well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
you. They'll do it for you.
They got to authenticate signatures and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So
They'll do it for Lance.
yeah, just from a purely selfish play here, and that's not necessarily the best way to look at this sort of stuff. But I think we are convinced that if we were just going to look at it from a selfish play, this would benefit our inland market tremendously. I may be wrong, and there may be data to say that. The only thing that concerns me about it is, assuming we get this qualified, which I think we feel we're going to get it qualified.
I believe so.
We're going to be up against teachers' unions and police and firefighters, and that's a tough one. That's a tough one when you see ads on television and you get stuff in there that says the firefighters are against this, and to the degree that we get called out by name as a realtor organization as supporting this, that could be potentially a little concern. But you got any thoughts on that?
Just keep in mind that it expands an existing situation, existing tax law already. So let's just expand it and let's make it happen. See us in the back.
Brooke, you got any comments on that? I mean, I totally threw a question at you. I promised I wasn't going to sandbag you.
I think the only thing they need to lower it from 55 to no restriction. I mean,
Amen, brother. I'll tell you why that's not, because it didn't poll well. Look,
Polls
I ran
will
for
be-
office. Let me tell you, polls are everything, baby. And the reality, it didn't poll well. This can get done. This can pass if we get it on the ballot.
Yeah, and correct me, Doug. This is not a one-time.
No, it's taking it from a one-time opportunity to a multiple opportunities for people 55 and older. But remember also the disabled and people that lost their homes through or had problems with their homes in natural disaster, which is bigger than you think. So it's a good thing all around. And if you're not 55, you will be.
Yes, we all will be. Okay, this is the deal. I'm going to cut this panel 2 minutes short because we're running a little bit late. We got Chris on deck over there to bring us home. So thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it very, very much. And here you go.
So, point that way. All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It is nice to be back. I apologize for being a little casual today. I am on a plane later today. And in any case, I got to tell you, I had a business meeting with Lance earlier in the year, and he showed up in a sport coat and a T-shirt. So, kind of anything goes now, really, when you think about it, right? On that basis. By the way, does everybody like the photo I found of you online there? It was on your Zillow account.
You found a
Is that,
picture of me? Oh,
yeah, is that like a high school photo?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Either that or some serious photoshopping going on.
Hey,
What do
I
you got
still
there?
have a mic. I forgot I had a mic. I could respond to this. Hey, you be careful, because Chris and I wouldn't say we're friends yet, but we're
All
becoming
right.
friendlier. And
We may be going in the wrong direction at this point in time.
That's right.
Anyway, it is very nice to be back with you. Obviously, there are probably a lot of concerns. I love batting cleanup at this event because I get to go and fix you of all this broken stuff you heard earlier and give you the real story and just give you kind of this great scoop on things. And really, I know you've heard a lot on the Inland Empire. I got a little bit of that. I'm going to touch on a couple of topics I heard about earlier. But for the most part, I think we need to take on the big picture stuff because
Hey, Chris, just to give you a heads up, we might have a little formatting problem with your PowerPoint, so just so you know.
oh, that's all right.
Well, all right. Well,
I mean, you know,
we'll make it work.
yeah, you should just be able to shrink it down.
All right, you keep talking. We'll fix it.
All right, right. Well, don't don't screw with me too badly. I mean, they should be listening to me anyway. This thing's not even working, dude. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So, yeah, anyway, I'll just, look, so when you're talking to your clients on a daily basis, of course, they're going to be a little bit panicked about all the chaos you've seen in the market, all the chaos you've seen in politics, with a big picture, what is going on out there. And I think back, I used this last year. This is one of my first slides I gave you when we had this conversation last year. And I bring it up because, it just seems so long ago, doesn't it? That we had this surprise, and of course, this November surprise has turned into this what I call weapon of mass distraction. I never in my wildest dreams could have imagined that this would have turned out the way it has. Now, one of the things about this and the chaos there, and I'm running into this because we're so polarized, and I go places and I talk about Trump. You're either making fun and half the audience is angry at you, or you're pretending he's okay and the other half of the audience is angry at you. I had somebody seriously in the middle of a talk got up and started screaming at me that I was nothing better than a CNN commentator before they stormed out the door. And I actually had to go Google that. Why is that an insult? I'm a little confused. But apparently in some parts of the U.S., being a CNN commentator, that actually is considered to be an insulting comment to make. But, I tell you what. Here's the issue. When you think about all the things that are going on in this economy, both in the short run and the long run, things we've talked about in the past, things we're going to talk about today, and then you start to think about this and this constant litany of stories and what actually is going on out there once you get away from this, and you start to realize that most of this is just smoke. It's just distraction. And, there are people who think that Donald Trump is the worst thing ever. And there are people who think he's our savior. And the answer is he's none of the above. What Trump is a symptom of a much larger underlying problem in our economy today. And that is the fact that our politics continue to become incredibly disconnected from reality. And his ascendance is a reflection of that, candidly, on both sides of the aisle. Okay, you with me? All right. Well, you know what? Just leave it. Don't worry about it. They're going to be able to see the slides later if they want. It's fine. You can't see it. I'll explain what it is. Fair enough? All right. So, with this in mind, I'm going to try and not make this about Trump. I don't want to. I'm going to try to give you some objective realities for what's going on out there today. And then, from that perspective, that's the perspective you should be bringing your clients. Because in the end, what they need is the objective reality, not the chaos of that kabuki theater going on daily in Washington, D.C. So here's the good. The good is meet the new economy, same as the old economy. By the end of 2016, we already had a head of steam. That translated into a very decent 2017. Lots of momentum coming out of the end of that year into this year. Throw on top of that this fiscal stimulus you were using, which again has long-term implications which aren't good, but in the short run is clearly stimulative. And this is going to be a good year. There's no doubt about it. Probably 3% plus growth over the course of this year. Solid numbers across the board. Chance of a recession in the near term, still basically very low. Outside of some out-of-the-blue, massive geopolitical event, I just don't see any kind of downturn in the economy over the next 24 months. We continue to be in that place. And candidly, I don't care how long this expansion has been. If you've seen some economic speakers, they always love to throw up the little bar chart where they say, well, this expansion is currently the third longest expansion. And in 7 days, 6 hours, and 22 minutes, it'll be the second longest expansion. As if that means anything, right? That's an irrelevant statistic. Who cares how long they are? Remember, every expansion is permanent until it's murdered by a negative shock to the system. No shock, no recession, period. Now, this doesn't mean things are fine. Last year I was here, I was actually more confident about the general economy than I am today. And it's not the short-run issues. Obviously, in the short run, things are better, but we are starting to see some real problems. Labor shortages issues, particularly in the state. Obviously, we've had this market froth and volatility. The bond rates have been moving. The stock market's been all over the place. And of course, you have an aggressive Fed who continues to push rates up, the flattening yield curve, sharp growth in government deficits about to occur. You're seeing these global trade worries. You're suddenly seeing declines in consumer savings. None of these are good trends. Are they things that are going to have a major negative detrimental effect on the economy over the course of the next 2 years or year? No. But clearly, there are some issues growing. In other words, what you see here may end up being nothing. We may turn course and these things don't turn into something, or these could indeed be the seeds of the next downturn in the economy, all things we have to keep an eye on as we move forward over the next couple of years. But right now, nothing terribly worrisome. For me, I go back to this idea of the distraction, this idea of the conversation being totally wrong. You know, we live in this world where we're so obsessed with what's going on a day-to-day basis in D.C. that we're forgetting to deal with these long-term problems. Things about infrastructure, wealth and income inequality, healthcare cost inflation, our housing shortages here in the state. Not enough is taking place. And that's because of this ongoing disconnect. Every time I turn on the radio, whether it's a speaker from the left or the right, they sit around creating problems that don't exist while they ignore the very real problems that do. And that's an equal sort of opportunity situation on both sides of the aisle. And, you know, that for me, I think, is the most frustration at all. We don't seem to have either party grounded in anything resembling reality. So I'm going to go through these slides really quick. Again, top-level overview. I'm going to have a little time for Q&A at the end of this, right? I always like a little Q&A. All right, that's fine. If you're hungry and leave, just do it quietly. That's all we ask. If you're hungry and bring something back, bring it for everyone. Overall year-on-year growth, as already noted, accelerated through the course of the year, about 2.7% growth by the end of the year on a year-on-year basis. That's solid numbers. That's about the high points we've been seeing since the Great Recession came to an end. Most of the acceleration in the economy was driven by increases in business investment. Business investment picked up mainly because oil and exports have picked up. The big slowdown in 15 and 16 was driven by the global commodity glut. The slowdown in the overall global economy, the slowdown in oil exploration here, those forces were fading in 16, and this has been a great year overall for these particular sectors. Exports have been rising very nicely. Right now, over the last month, oil production in the U.S. has been over 10 million barrels per day. That's like a 50-year record. And it's expanding very dramatically there, in part because prices are up. And it's interesting because one of the issues, obviously, in the Inland Empire, you think of all the people who are commuters, you always have to worry, well, gee, do oil prices going up? Is that going to be some sort of existential threat? It's worth keeping in mind that the oil industry right now, the swing player in the global markets is the United States. And we have massive amounts of oil out there, shale oil in particular. A couple of years ago, they just found this thing called the Wolfcamp Shale, which has 20 billion barrels of oil sitting in it, are ready to be extracted. Oil prices aren't going up that much. The supply situation is going to be such that pretty soon the market's going to be flooded again because these prices even at $70 a barrel. So no big worries there. Industrial statistics are picking up. Industrial production is 3%. Real manufacturing output, this is as of the fourth quarter of last year, hit an all-time high record level. Yes, we're still a nation that produces lots of stuff, as the case may be. Ports are humming along, had a decent year, no doubt about that. Things are doing pretty good. Housing markets, it was a decent year, not spectacular. Home prices picked up a little bit. Nationally, last year, about 5.2%, according to Case-Shiller. This year, about 6.2%, so a little bit of an uptick. Seattle, Vegas, San Diego, San Francisco in the top spots in terms of growth. Southern California, a little slow, greater LA, a little slower than that right now. In terms of housing statistics, the multifamily are about 400,000. The single family are about 800,000, a little over 1.2 million units per year. You know, I remember a few years ago when we first started talking recovery, people are predicting that these would be in the 1.4 to 1.5 million range. Now they haven't gotten there, and you know what? They shouldn't have. Because realistically, our population growth has slowed to the point where 1.2 million units a year is about right, given where we are. That is really a comfortable number. On the right-hand side, you can see the huge overbuilding we saw prior to the downturn, and then the underproduction. And now we're right back to that right point, about 1.1 to 1.15 units per new household in the U.S. So this is right. 1.2 is about it. The only real question has to do with the 400,000 multifamily versus the 800,000 single family. That balance may be off. We might have expected a few less multifamily, a little more single family, but we haven't seen the bounce back in home ownership because, candidly, the mortgage markets are still mired in the doldrums. Overall, mortgage credit out there right now is only up about 5% on a year-on-year basis. That's very weak. In fact, home prices in the United States are still growing faster than outstanding mortgage debt. That suggests that the overall leverage in the U.S. housing market continues to fall. That's both a problem because it's been that mortgage constraint that's kept the market from bouncing back even quicker. On the other hand, anytime someone starts talking about a bubble in the U.S. or a bubble in the United States, I just kind of chuckle. Because the idea that we have a bubble, look, if anybody asks you about bubbles, here's the answer. Bubbles have two sources. Either we're overbuilding or overborrowing. And we are neither overbuilding nor are we overborrowing at this particular point in time. It's not a bubble. Simple as that. We are not there. Now, are you going to get the same boom, boom returns maybe you got 5, 6 years ago? Probably not. But again, from an investment standpoint, you shouldn't be aiming for boom, boom returns. That's not how these markets work. So not a bubble, be fine on that particular front. One of the big things is if homeownership rates do start to drift up, what does that mean for multifamily? And this is a little intriguing because, you know, you have started to see some signs that homeownership rates are starting to drift up. Now, don't get overly excited. You know, the fourth quarter number came out and everybody got excited because it looked like millennials were starting to buy again. But, man, that survey's so noisy. I mean, it was such a tiny little blip. Yes, they seem to be drifting up, but we got a long ways to go at this particular point in time to get anywhere close to back where we were 5, 6, 7 years ago. And remember, as already noted, it is absolutely the case that the single-family rentals are the big swing factor when it comes to the multifamily space. As long as those single-family rentals get sold off to feed the shift, you're going to have a situation where multifamily will remain relatively stable. So I'm fine on this particular front. No big issues there. Consumer spending was good. We had a great Christmas. Auto sales are up. Retail sales, both online and brick and mortar, did pretty well. The brick and mortar stuff is actually surprising. Overall sales at brick and mortar outlets were about 6% year on year at Christmas time. It does suggest that there's a little bit of re-equilibrium happening between the online sales and the brick and mortar sales world, which I think is good. It was going to find a space. We don't want to buy everything online, just most things, as the case may be. So we are finding that happy space at this particular point in time. Consumer spending really has been continuing to chug along very well. And this gets me into my first worry about the economy, and that is that the savings rate is indeed, if you could see through the curtain on the right-hand side, you would see that the savings rate is indeed starting to drift back down again. Savings rates right now are actually as low as they were back in 2005, which is a worry, because people suddenly seem to be getting ahead of themselves for whatever reason, and that's not comfortable for the rest of, shall we say, for the U.S. economy overall from a long-term standpoint. But one of the questions there is it as bad as it was in 2005? Should we expect that kind of big pullback? And the answer is no, because as already noted, while savings rates have dropped, debt levels have not come back. Mortgage debt has not come back. Indeed, right now, the best you can say about overall households is that they have just sort of leveled out in terms of their debt-to-income ratios. Deleveraging has ended, but they haven't started to re-leverage in any substantive way. And of course, with low interest rates, household financial obligations are quite low. The consumer borrowing sector seems to be very strong. Now, I've heard some rumblings here or there, some credit unions talking about some little problems they're seeing. I don't know. We hear that all the time. None of the statistics on consumer debt suggest there's any problems out there whatsoever. And yes, that's true with people with student loans too. It's fine. Things are fine. But when people stop saving, then we have to start going to the rest of the world. Because here's one of the things about trade deficits that this administration doesn't seem to get. Trade deficits, for the most part, are not driven by, shall we say, competing trade regimes between two nations. Trade deficits are largely a function of the gap between savings and investment within a nation. If we as a nation are consuming more than we should, then to make up for that, we have to borrow from the rest of the world. And that is more or less what the trade deficit is. And when we stop saving as consumers, even as businesses are ramping up their investment, that tends to open up the trade deficit, and that is exactly what we've been seeing. While we have seen a nice uptick in exports, imports are booming. And overall, the trade deficit for goods is now the worst it's been since 2008, late 2007. This is reflective, again, of a consumer sector that's getting a little ahead of itself. And at some level, we have to understand it's our issues. Now, with that in mind, of course, this came out recently, and John talked about this. 25% tariff on steel, 10% on aluminum. It's the big deal, all right? It's a big hubbub. I got to tell you something. In general, I don't like this. It makes me nervous because I don't like where it's going. This specifically, I couldn't give a crap about. I mean, you talk about irrelevant. I mean, this is so irrelevant. The fact that we're even having this conversation is odd. And I'll tell you why. First of all, imports of aluminum and steel here, we're talking, something on the order of, depending on how you slice and dice it, $30 billion of imports, maybe $28 billion in imports. By the way, last year, we imported $2.4 trillion worth of goods and services. $2.4 trillion. This is a minuscule proportion of that overall number. It's just not a big sector. And there are questions as to why we are even doing it. For example, look at actual imports. They haven't been going up. In fact, imports have been kind of steady over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years. No big deal there. Nothing really going on. What else do we know about it? Well, here's an interesting statistic. Did you know that 70% of all consumed metal products in the United States are metal products that were produced in the United States? Imports are only 30%. And by the way, that 30%, that's been pretty steady. Back in 2009, about our metal producers produced a little bit, about 78%. And today it's, a little less than that, about 70%. But the numbers are fine. Most of the metal is still produced in the United States. And I love this. For those who are all for this, they will talk about the important defense expenditures. We have to have steel and aluminum for our defense industry. Well, two things on that. First of all, defense industry already buys all their steel and aluminum from U.S. producers. They have to. And by the way, all defense purchases of steel and aluminum in the United States, it's 3% of the market. Anytime someone talks about defense and this being a defense issue, it's preposterous. It's preposterous. It really is. This is a pure grab on the part of the industry. They're going to get some market share from some of those overseas guys. Who are those overseas guys we're hitting? After all, we know the Chinese are the big bad boys on the trade block, right? It's all about these Chinese and all the dumping they're doing in the steel market, which is why when people are going to suffer from this, and let me read this. My graph's a little small here. Let me see. Number one, Canada, Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, and Japan. I don't even see China on here. They may be dumping steel into the world market. They're not dumping into the U.S. market. They aren't. These are our allies that we're smacking in the face here, not China. This whole thing is so weird. It's so odd. But what about the jobs? Again, every time someone who's for this starts talking about the jobs, they'll tell you, it's all about those steel workers. Those poor towns that have been wiped out by foreign steel. Really? The entire metal industry, the entire primary metals industry in the United States, the entire thing right now hires less than 100,000 people. In 1 month, on average, this nation adds between 150 and 200,000 jobs in 1 month. And we're talking about 100,000 jobs as if this is critical? The whole conversation is crazy that we would even do this. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt our economy. It's not going to help our economy. But here's the kind of thing that scares me. Trade wars. Easy to win. Wow. This is the kind of scary stuff I'm talking about here. This is the stuff we don't need. Does this spin out of control? I don't know. You want to know the one existential threat to our economy right now? If this should spin out of control. And the fact that one of his primary economic advisors, a relatively reasonable person, Cohn, just got up and left yesterday, doesn't make me happy. Say the very least. So I don't know where this goes. Yes, you got to keep an eye on it. Hopefully, cooler minds will prevail. I would point out one of my favorite quotes yesterday, which doesn't make me happy, but I do like to quote. Did anybody hear what the European Union had to say about this? We can do stupid too. Look it up. Look it up. So we'll see. We'll see how this is going to shake out. So And of course, do we really need all these jobs? Look, oopsie daisy. Oh, you guys are really screwing me here. All right. Do, 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 do. We're still in the same place, guys. That's good. We're fine. We're all happy. We're all happy. Everybody's happy, right? Good. Okay. Let's keep going. Yes. Exactly. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Last year, decent year for job, not great, about 1.45% growth. A reason for that, of course, is we're running out of workers. The idea of labor shortages, I've talked to you the last couple of years. On the left-hand side, that's the job openings rate. You can see the job openings rate right now is running 4%. That's for like 4 months in a row, highest it's ever been. Unemployment rates, pegged at the bottom. Take the U3. Right now, the U3 is skating just a little bit above, just a tiny bit above 4% right now. And put that in context, it was that low in 2007, that low in 2000. And mind you, those labor markets were overheated by the massive financial bubbles ripping through the system at that point in time. Those bubbles don't exist right now. So this is the real deal. We are simply running out of workers. And of course, running out of workers, wage gains are in the system. We continue to hear they're not. Of course they are. If you look at growth in average cost per employee hour, real wage gains all suggest tight labor markets. People really are better off. The big issue, the lack of bodies, all driven, of course, by the fact that the boomers are on the edge of retirement. And I always love this. We always have to hear these generationalists who like to roll out in front of you and tell you how, the millennials are the biggest generation ever, and you got to focus on millennials this and millennials that. And millennials are fine. I hire millennials. They're very pretty. They're nice to have around the office, right? They're useless otherwise, but they're nice to have around the office. They're like decor. Yeah. Well, actually, I take it back. Maybe not so pretty over this table. Just now that you mention it. But anyway, moving on. All right, so the point here about millennials, of course, is they're only about 1.5%, 2% bigger than the boomers, to be honest with you. They're really not that big of a generation. We are going from a population pyramid into a population column because of the big slowdown in overall birth rates. And the net result of that is we're simply not getting the same growth in the labor force we've had in past cycles. And that means this labor shortage is going to remain in the system. Indeed, the slowdown in labor supply is one of the primary reasons why the U.S. economy has slowed down in terms of growth. About 2/3 of the slowdown in growth can be traced directly to labor supply. Simple as that. It's a very simple problem out there. Now, mind you, the fix to this is to have immigration reform that increases the number of immigrants in the United States. And yet again, I start running upon this conflict between the views of the administration, which seem to be that somehow or other immigrants are stealing American jobs. We have 11 million undocumented people in this nation, and we have full labor markets. Wake up. This is not rocket science. This is basic facts. They are an integral part of this system. They need to be here. We need them. It's a wonderful match, and we should have more of them from my perspective because this nation is short of bodies. It's as simple as that. The other thing, by the way, we need to do is increase the Social Security retirement age by a couple of years. Again, boomers, for those of you who are out here, I understand it. You've worked hard. You feel you're due your retirement. I appreciate that. But guys, Social Security was set up that when a good worker bee retired at 62, they died at 66. This living to 94 thing, that wasn't in the cards. So suck it up, work a couple more years, and pay your dues, okay? I think that's fair. I don't think this is complicated. It's just part of it. Now, there's some other things in here, too. This is the CBO report that came out. We got to reform the local tax code. You got to reduce deficits over 10 years. And with that in mind, I'll come back to this in a second. We got to talk about that tax plan that came out at the end of last year. Now, mind you, when the CBO said we could help our economy by having some tax reform, they were very clear. Tax reform, tax reform. That's different than a tax cut. If you go back to Reagan, everybody talks about Reagan being a tax cut god. No, it was Reagan and Tip O'Neill who were tax reform gods. They were guys who got in and fixed a broken system. We live in a world of intense political pressures, and there are constantly groups lobbying for special perks, special protections, special privileges. They are working to get loopholes into the system. That's bad. Over time, what that means is our economy becomes almost a tax apartheid state, where you have an elite group who don't pay anything close to what they should, and the net result of that is the rest of us pay more than is efficient. And you have to equalize that every once in a while by cleaning up the system. And we desperately need that in the United States. And corporate profits is no exception. Corporate profits is kind of front and center on this. The statutory rate of 35% was preposterously high. Of course it had to come down. But keep in mind, the effective corporate tax rate paid out there was only 21%. 21%. That's not anything close to 35. And that's because there are massive loopholes in the corporate tax system that needs to be fixed. Now, did they fix those? No, they did not. None of those, non-taxpayers are paying their taxes. And yes, that's the coal companies and the energy companies and the oil companies. But guess what, guys? It's also some of our fair-haired children, such as Google and Apple, who, because of their special perks and privileges, don't pay anywhere close to what they should be paying. Do you know how much money those guys are making? Pay a little more in taxes, guys. Just suck it up, do your job. But again, we didn't take care of any of that. So we cut taxes, and here's what you need to know. First of all, the cuts were in part offset by getting rid of some distorting deductions. Some of these we know about, the state and local interest deduction, the state and local tax deduction. And I want to tell you a dirty little secret here. Between you and me, that's a good idea. I know. We love being able to write off interest. It's a cherished part of the tax code. Most, if not all, economists would say it's not right. We're encouraging people to take on too much debt, just like they got rid of some of the interest deductions for corporations, because, again, you're encouraging too much debt out there. It's distortionary to the market. It largely benefits the upper middle class. It's actually not progressive in any real sense. Most people agree it shouldn't be in the system. And if you got rid of it completely, the market will re-equilibrate relatively quickly and move along. We just got to get over the hump and get through that process. Most corporations and households will pay less in taxes. This is purely stimulative. There's no doubt about it. And that's true in California. Everybody got all in a hubbub because Californians who pay a lot in interest and who pay a lot in taxes are going to get hit. But remember, 80% of Californians don't even itemize. For them, this is an irrelevant conversation. And for those who do itemize, like myself and Lance, we're just going to have to suck it up, man, We're going to probably pay in a little bit more this year, but in net, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. And I couldn't agree more. I don't think this is going to impact the local housing market at all, because the issues here are all driven by supply. We're not on in any way, shape, or form. We're nowhere near this horrible affordability kind of place where this thing would really be a killer. It's just not at that point at this point in time. Because most people are paying less, it gives a short-term boost to the economy. But here's the key. It's going to add $2 to $4 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. And that's where, again, my head starts to explode. Because I'm thinking to myself, really? Now, I know, when they were passing this, you heard McConnell and Ryan rolled out, and they said, this is going to pay for itself. You cut taxes, everything's going to be fine. Growth is going to pick up. We all know that works, right? Really? Really? You think cutting taxes is going to make the economy grow faster? If you think that, I would like to sell you some of my, I'd like to sell you some of my new diet food. And then when you're done with the diet food, you can go work it off on Chris's brand new exercise equipment. It's fantastic. Trust me. Look, we're going to end up borrowing $2 to $4 trillion. And then, of course, all pretense was dropped when they came out with the spending bill. I mean, it was crazy how they increased spending, cut taxes. It's like they don't even care. And this to me, again, the broader context is very clear. We were already, because of boomers retiring, we were already on the hook for about $10 trillion in new debt over the next decade. And what they've done is they've added $2 to $4 trillion on it. So this is our political choice in the United States. The Democrats who say, problem? We don't have a problem. Everything's fine. The Republicans, yeah, we have a huge problem, and we're going to make it worse. Wow. This is our political choices in the United States. Now, this is distressing because we have an enormous issue coming down over the next decade. But I'll tell you what, for a decade, that's still too far for political changes. Candidly, it's still too far even for economic changes. Because, of course, the other thing coming down the pike right now, interest rates. We all know the Fed's been tight, and they got aggressive over the course of the last year, very aggressive. And they've been tightening up, of course, those short-run rates pretty hard. but it hasn't had a big impact on the 10-year bond. Indeed, most of the change has simply gone towards reducing the yield curve, as we say, the spread between long and short-run rates. But of course, all of a sudden, recently, we saw a big panic. And bond rates started to pop up. The S&P dropped down. There's been a lot of volatility there. After a year of nice smooth sailing, suddenly all sorts of volatility there. And yes, people are worried because, mortgage rates looks like they're drifting up, and maybe that stock market's going to cause a big wealth hit in the United States. But before we even start talking about that, let's take a step back. Because you look at that pop in the bond from January, you go, wow, that's pretty big. But here it is over the last 30 years or so. And do you see where we are? I mean, yeah, we saw an increase. We're still below 3%. That's incredibly low. That's really lower than any time before 2007. Rates are really low. Rates are still really low. And, this kind of short-term movement in the market, probably not too much of a surprise. But remember, we just got back to where we were in 2014. We're not even above that 2004 thing. And yes, it is true. The stock market lost about 10%. But, at the end of last year, it was up about 24%. So on net, we're still up 14%, which is probably even there a little bit too aggressive. Now, one of the big questions is, where is rates? Rates in particular, where are rates going right now? Because you need to know that, because your clients need to understand about borrowing costs. Well, here's one thing you don't have to worry about, and that's inflation. And it's funny because I know inflation really set this whole thing off. We had a January employment report, and then we had 2 back-to-back CPI reports, and they all suggested inflation was creeping back in, and everybody's all nervous about that. But a January labor report is completely unbelievable. December to January is an enormous month of transition because we're going from Christmas to non-Christmas. And we try to control for that, what we call seasonal adjustment. Forget it. You can't do it. It's noisy. There's nothing in there worth talking about. You can't believe anything on there. I don't even look at January numbers. It's just pointless. The other part of it, of course, is about inflation. Yeah, we had 2 months of inflation, but that's on the back end of 2 really weird low months of inflation last year. This is regression to the mean. Year-on-year inflation right now is about 1.7%. If you look at PCE, you're looking at 1.5%. These aren't big numbers. This is a weak inflationary environment. And M2, broad supply, money supply, that's been decelerating, not accelerating. There's no sign of inflation out there. Same thing on the lending side. Bank lending slowed down. Bank lending is important for money supply because of the multiplier effects. That's running 3% year on year. Bank credit's relatively tight right now because the bank's been a little nervous about some of the credit market issues. Again, nothing to see here. For me, this is a momentary blip. Well, aren't they reacting to the increase in government borrowing? Look, we were already on the hook for $10 trillion in borrowing, and they hadn't responded to that. Why do you think this $2 to $4 trillion is moving things? Now, there is a short-run difference there, and I'll tell you this. Over the course of the next year, the bond traders are worried about the snowball effect. We borrow a lot of short-term debt. Now we're going to be increasing our overall borrowing, and suddenly you're going to see a lot more borrowing on a short-term basis in those auction markets, and that's strictly because of rolling over short-term debt, even as we're borrowing a little bit more. And that's what they call a snowball effect, because it only really has to do with turning over short-run debt rather than 2 wrong-run needs. And there's some worries because there's a little slowdown in actual foreigners buying our debt, that the 2 of those, the snowball with a slowdown in foreign bets, that could create a pop in interest rates, and that's what they're responding to. It's a financial move. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not. But I'll tell you what, if it doesn't get as bad as they think, and I don't think it will, what you're going to end up seeing is you're going to see it coming back down again. And here's the reason I don't think it's going to get that big, turn into that big of a deal. Because while it is true the foreigners are pulling back just a little bit, there's another side of this. The changes in the tax law mean that corporations don't want to have as much debt on their books because they can no longer write off as much interest deduction. So if they start basically getting rid of some debt, that money's going to have to go somewhere, and it'll go into the treasury market. So I think this is a head fake. I think interest rates are going to drift down just a little bit, and I don't think you're going to see any major problems here as we move forward. As for the stock market itself, is it another bubble? I don't know. The PE ratio is a little bit elevated, but interest rates are low, and corporate profits are growing, and they got a nice tax cut. I don't see anything particularly unreasonable here. And the key is this. It doesn't really matter because overall debt in the United States, if you look at corporate debt, financial debt, again, we're just coming out of the deleverage cycle. There's no buildup of debt out there. And that means whatever the stock market does is probably not that big of a deal. So I'm just going to kind of ignore it. I think it's going to probably continue to go up again, but I don't think it's a relevant issue. It's certainly no canary in the coal mine, as the case may be. Closer to home, our fair state, California, I always love this. Oh, God, they're still bashing us. Yesterday, Fox, or 2 days ago, some report got released that said California was like the worst for quality of life in the nation. Which I'm just like, what? Really? They're saying that even as they're getting covered with 19 feet of snow in the Northeast? They're running away from tornadoes in Kansas? People live in Texas? Ah. We have had quality. I mean, I get it. I mean, what? But again, putting all that to one side, our state's doing wonderful. Top 8 in terms of job growth. Well, they're bad jobs. I always love that. They're bad jobs. You know, here's data. I love this. This is change in employment by income, full-time employment from 2012 to 2016. We've added 1.3 million full-time workers over the last 4 years, of which almost half are earning over 100K a year. Those aren't bad jobs, folks. Those are really good jobs. Indeed, if you look at the numbers, I like this. California's share of national personal income, over 14% of the nation right now. Never been higher. Wasn't higher in 1999. This is the highest it's ever been. In terms of the distribution of income, right now, get this, I'm counting, 16, 24, 34, a little less than 34% of Californian households make over 100K a year. 10% of California households make over 200,000 a year. Just think of that. We are so far ahead of everybody else for income. Rich people are fleeing the state. Really? Well, if they are, apparently we're making more of them than are leaving. Because on that, we're a hell of a lot richer than we were a few years ago. But we are seeing this big slowdown. And, of course, you look at the numbers. I haven't seen the revisions. The revisions came out this morning, and they did move around a bit. I got a chance to look at them. Here, I'll tell you what happened out here. So we got the revisions this morning. Inland Empire is still top. You guys are like 3.5% year on year. Very solid numbers there, a little better than last year. Ventura got downgraded. Sacramento a little bit as well. Fresno is now the second fastest growing economy in the state. There has been still distinct slowdowns in San Francisco, San Jose. Orange County looked much better. They popped pretty well, but LA is relatively slow at this point in time. Most of the coastal areas are seeing a general slowdown in the economy. Reason for that, of course, has to do with incredibly low unemployment rates. And you look at the numbers, they're just low. LA, 4.4% unemployment rate. 4.4%. That's the lowest ever. Inland Empire, the number I had was 4.4, but I'm not sure if that number is exactly right. I got to go look that one up. It may be where we seasonally adjusted to. The point is, basically, almost at a record low level here in the Inland Empire. We're running out of people. And, of course, even as we're running out of people, home prices continue to go up. And this goes back to our basic problem, running out of workforce. Now, we shouldn't have to run out of workforce. I'll tell you one thing about being in California or Nevada or Washington or Oregon or a lot of these other places, Texas as well, Florida as well. These are places kids want to live. Millennials are flocking out of the Northeast and Midwest to large coastal cities, to some of these growing economies. They're not coming here, and that's because we put up "we do not want you" sign. In other words, we don't build housing to accommodate anybody. And net migration in the state is a 0.25 on an annual basis. Overall labor supply growth running a paltry 1%. You cannot continue to have 2.5% job growth if your labor force is only growing by less than 1% a year. There's a basic physical reality there. And you're starting to see that. You remember the last couple of years, the minimum wage, of course, went up. And I got, 30 calls on this from everybody. Everybody I want to know about minimum wage. This year, the minimum wage went up, and I got one call from one reporter. And I started laughing. And he said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, I forgot it went up. And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, you're the person who's actually called me." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because you're not worried about paying a minimum wage to a person you can't hire. When you can't fill your slots, it doesn't matter. It's not part of the conversation." And that is an enormous issue, lack of labor, particularly along the coast where there's just no housing supply. It's as simple as that. And that is driving business inland. The Inland Empire is on top because there's room out here. There's people out here. Business moving. But it's not just here. Sacramento, same sort of thing. I can't tell you how many businesses I've talked to up in the Bay Area, because we do a lot of work up there, that are moving out of San Jose, San Mateo, and San Francisco and moving up into the Sacramento region. Because there's opportunities up there, there's space, and it's not that expensive. So they're making those particular moves. Housing supply, how short are we? Well, we did some simulations earlier in the year. We said if you wanted to maintain a 2% job growth, you need between 110 and 260,000 permits per year. So 210 to 260,000 permits a year. We're running a little over 110 right now. So we're not even half of what we need, and we all know why. It's CEQA and NIMBYism and zoning laws and everything else under the planet, and it's having an impact. I mean, what are the impacts? Yes, homelessness, overcrowding is getting worse. Certain low-income families are having a terrible time. There's no doubt about it. But what's interesting is for all this conversation about how bad these housing prices are, guess what? Take a step back and realize there's an upside to labor shortages, and that is rising incomes. And incomes have been rising. And interestingly enough, over the last 3 years, people without a high school degree have seen the largest increase in their incomes. That is because there's a lack of workers out there. They're getting more per hour. They're working more hours. Now, mind you, you still want to get a college degree. The gap is still huge, but the gains are truly lifting our boat. And I've heard for the last 3 years in a row, I've been hearing from these apartment experts, oh, apartments can't go up anymore. Apartment prices can't go up anymore. Rents have got to top out here anytime. No, they don't. Because, believe it or not, with solid income increases for folks who are renters, you can continue to see these increases. Indeed, overall, affordability is getting better in the state. If you look at the share of renters that are spending over 30% of their income on housing, that's been falling. So the people who are getting into trouble, the people who are suffering in this particular environment, they're actually the minority. Yet if you talk to the people in Sacramento, they're almost exclusively the topic of conversation. No one's talking about the fact that in general things are better because labor markets are so tight. They're not having this conversation, and you're really missing the boat. Because I'd like to point out that if you want to really worry about housing affordability, competitiveness, I don't even care about apartments. I care about housing. Because people buying houses here are the kind of people we need just as much as people who rent apartments here. And those folks can look at a place like Dallas or you know, I mean, places like San Antonio or places in Florida, and they go, yeah, there's a big difference. Maybe even a bigger difference in the rental market. So this is where I'm worried, and we don't barely have these talks. Now, in terms of incomes, I should point out, and you can't really see the data because it's too big, but incomes are doing just as well here in the Inland Empire as they are in places in terms of the increases. Indeed, about right now, about 25% of households are making over $100K a year. That's up 3 percentage points from where it was a couple of years ago. So very solid numbers on that front. The same gains you're seeing across the United States are occurring here in the Inland Empire. It's not outside of the Inland Empire, and poor blue-collar Inland Empire is still suffering. This is not a blue-collar community, folks. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. Yes, some of it's logistics, but there's a lot of other stuff happening at this point in time as well. Migration's starting to pick up because of the lack of housing, the cost differences. People are starting to move into the region. There's no doubt about it. And you're starting to see some movement. Prices are picking up just a little bit in most of these particular areas. Fontana, $370. Moreno Valley, $314, $521. Permits, yeah, they're picking up a bit. Not spectacular, nice steady increases. San Bernardino all of a sudden got a bunch of multifamily permits, which I think is kind of good. But the single-family markets, you feel a little bit more, but not huge yet. But my guess is over the next couple of years, the tide's really going to turn. You're going to see a lot more investment out here. You just feel like you're right at the edge of it right now. The chatter, the conversations going on. And that, again, is because there is room to build out here. There's economic opportunities. This is when you really start to see the migration surge, picking up the local economy, as the case may be. Now, there was a question earlier about single-family rentals. And we don't have 2017 data, but we do have the 2016 data. And here's a picture you were talking about. The peak in single-family rentals occurred actually back in 2013. And since then, they've been drifting down just slowly. And again, I think the point is well taken. We're starting to see the movement back towards single-family owner-occupied kind of demand. And I think the hedge guys are going to start selling off. But this is all future. It hasn't happened yet. It's still in process. So the boat hasn't turned, but you could feel it starting to change. So keep an eye on it. It's going to be very interesting. With that in mind, you look back at this package of housing bills they put in place last year, and you ask yourself, did they actually move the boat? And the answer is, for the most part, no. Because they focus on affordable housing stuff. They're focused on collecting money to build some of these subsidized units. And you can't do that. You can't do that because right off the bat, the state doesn't have enough money to build enough housing, even if they build housing appropriately, which they do not. Santa Monica, one of my favorite stories of all I heard recently, Santa Monica recently rolled out 63 affordable housing units. 63. That's going to move the needle. 63 affordable housing units. You know what the average cost per unit was? $700K. 700,000. Every one of them has an electric car charging station. Well, hey, if you're getting subsidized rent, you can afford a Tesla. It makes sense. Anyway, but in the midst of all that, there was a sneaky thing that one of my housing guys found for me, and it's SB 35, and this one's really interesting. This one you want to pay attention to. This one you want to talk to your folks about, because here's what SB 35 is. SB 35 is a kind of a quiet little bill that says, if you're not compliant with the ARENA standards, the state can take away your right to use subjective measures for permitting activity. Now, most people don't know what ARENA standard is, but I'll tell you what it is. ARENA standard is something that came up, this archaic thing that came up a bunch of years ago. It says every community has to build X number of homes. That's your ARENA standard. And what this really says is if you're not building that amount of homes, the state can sue the city and in turn take away their right to use any subjective measures of denying a building application. In other words, as long as you're within zoning rules, you're pretty much by right. That's huge. That is a huge change. Now, here's the key. In February, they released the results of the ARENA study. Turns out there's not one city in the entire state that's compliant. So this is beautiful because they have to pick a test case, sue them, and if it works, if it doesn't get hauled off by the state Supreme Court, this is going to change things. It's going to make it very interesting out there. So keep an eye on this. They're also trying to do SB 827, SB 828. That's RENA reform, make it even bigger, and having denser building around light rail station, which just makes sense. These are interesting. Keep an eye on them. So wrapping it up, positive. It's going to be a good year. Labor market's going to remain tight. It's going to constrain growth at some level. Rising job growth, excuse me. Let's go. Rising wages are going to put pressure on profits. Exports business is going to be strong. California housing shortages will constrain, again, labor force growth. Housing markets may soften a little bit this year because of these rising rates and people worried about taxes. But for me, I don't see it's going to be at worst stable and probably continue to see strong gains, and it's going to bounce forward. Multifamily doing just fine. Negatives, Fed's going to continue to tighten. They're flattening that yield curve. The markets are looking frothy. They're deregulating. The Fed's getting aggressive. They're worried about all that stuff. How that shakes out is going to be interesting. Consumer savings and the trade deficit are entering dangerous waters. The federal deficit is starting to widen. There are these challenges, these basic issues coming down the pike. But for the next couple of years, you're fine. You're just fine. But keep an eye on the end game because at some point in time, some of this stuff's going to come back to haunt us. But right here in the Inland Empire, you are in the hottest part of the California economy, the hottest part of the California labor housing market. So keep it up. Thank you very much.